Hello and welcome to this webinar about principles of assessment and rules of evidence. Before we begin with this presentation, we'd like to remind you of some safety measures. First, please ensure that you have adequate lighting that does not produce a glare on your screen. Second, please ensure that you maintain a distance from your screen so you avoid the need to bend your neck too much. Third, please ensure that you set the volume of this presentation to the minimum that you can hear to avoid any hearing damage. And lastly, please remember to take an eye break after watching this presentation. We hope you find this presentation useful for your studies. So in this webinar, we're going to learn about the principles of assessment and rules of evidence. At the end of this presentation, you should be able to first identify the 4 principles of assessment, next identify the 4 rules of evidence, and understand how they apply to you as a vet practitioner. The principles of assessment provide guidance on how assessment tools and instruments should be developed. These principles ensure that the assessment requirements of the relevant training package or VET accredited course are met. Learners are assessed against the competency standards and are assessed either competent or not yet competent. To ensure that the assessment decisions are based on quality evidence, assessors must follow the rules of evidence. So the standards for RTOs 2015 defines assessment as the process of collecting evidence and making judgments on whether competency has been achieved to confirm that an individual can perform to the standard required in the workplace as specified in a training package or a VET accredited course. So the VET industry follows an assessment system that allows the trainers and assessors to work with learners to collect evidence of competence using the benchmarks provided by the units of competency. In VET, assessment is focused on what learners can do and whether their performance meet the criteria specified by the industry in the competency standards. So it is essential for assessors to know how to make quality assessments. To do this, they must have a sound understanding of the principles of assessment. These principles are used to guide all stages and aspects of the assessment purpose. So the 4 principles of assessment are fairness, flexibility, validity, and reliability. So the first principle of assessment is fairness. According to the standards for RTOs 2015, fairness can be practiced by ensuring that individual learner needs are considered in the assessment process. It is likely to have different individuals coming together for an assessment event. This principle ensures that no individual is disadvantaged or favored over others. One important term to understand regarding fairness is reasonable adjustment. Reasonable adjustment exists because there may be instances when modifications are needed to meet the needs of the learner. This does not mean giving in all to the learner's request. Instead, making adjustments depends on the ability of the learner to participate and achieve outcomes. So one important thing to remember about reasonable adjustment is that any act of such must not compromise the integrity of the assessment requirements and the training package or the accredited course they are in line with. The second principle of assessment is flexibility. According to the standards for RTOs 2015, flexibility can be practiced by ensuring assessments that it reflects the learner's needs, assess competence held by the learner no matter how or where they have been acquired, and draws a range of assessment methods and uses those that are appropriate to the context, to the unit of competency and associated assessment requirements and the individual. Based on this principle, registered training organizations such as Inspire Education are required to ensure that there are recognition of prior learning or RPL options for the students. The third principle of assessment is validity. According to the standards for RTOs 2015, validity can be practiced in a variety of ways. Primarily, assessment should be based on the units of competency and their associated unit requirements or assessment requirements. If the competency standards require a student to demonstrate a competency in driving a car, for instance, then assessment on riding a bike is not valid. The last principle of assessment is reliability. Reliability is about consistency. In a way, it is much very connected to validity. In this principle, according to standards for RTOs 2015, evidence presented for assessment is consistently interpreted and assessment results are comparable, irrespective of the assessor conducting the assessment. So there should be uniform application, such that reliability is all about assessment tools and instruments, where two assessors conducting an assessment on the same learner, the tools and or instruments must be reliable enough that they arrive at the same judgment and result for each assessment item. In a competency-based assessment, learners are assessed against a competency standards and are assessed either as competent or not yet competent. One key aspect of competency-based assessment is that it is evidence-based. In competency based assessment, the learners have the responsibility to provide authentic evidence of their performance. Assessors are responsible for assisting the learners in identifying evidence that meet the requirements of a competence standard and the rules of evidence. And the four rules of evidence are valid, sufficient, current, and authentic. To ensure that assessment decisions are based on quality evidence, assessors must follow the rules of evidence. The standards for RTOs define rules of evidence as valid if the evidence presented by the learner is in accordance with the unit competency and associated assessment requirements, including the elements and the performance criteria, and demonstrates the skills and knowledge described in the competency standards. For example, you're assessing a candidate how to ride a bike. The learner must show that he is indeed riding a bike, not a car. It is sufficient if the evidences demonstrate relevance to assessment decisions in terms of quantity and quality, and the evidence demonstrates competence over time and is repeatable. So, for example, one unit requirement of TE-DES 401 of the new course TE 40116 is to design and develop two learning programs. The evidence is indeed sufficient if the candidate submitted two learning programs and not just one. The rules of evidence is authentic if the evidence presented for the assessment is the learner's own work and is verified as genuine. For example, most of the documents we ask to submit requires handwritten signatures or accomplished via handwritten. And it is said to be current if the evidence demonstrates current competency of the learner as of the present or recent past and complies with the current standards. So for example, those who are qualified with TE 40110 and wants to be qualified with the new course, we ask them to do the whole assessment cluster of the new course. This is because the units they attained in the assessment cluster from 40110 is not equivalent to the unit requirements of the assessment cluster of 40116. To attain current competence, the evidence we require are those of relevant to the current unit requirements. So let's have a recap of what we discussed in this presentation. Again, there are four principles of assessment, namely fairness, flexibility, validity, and reliability. In order to be fair, it is important to consider all of the individual's needs in the assessment process, including providing clear instructions for undertaking the assessment and lodging an appeal if necessary. This also takes into account any reasonable adjustments. In order to be flexible, assessments must be open to contextualization to different industries, scenarios, and needs they are put in. In order to be valid, assessment tools and instruments must assess the unit they are about and must ensure learners not only know, but they can demonstrate practical skills based on knowledge. And lastly, in order to be reliable, assessment tools and instruments must have a uniform application when different assessors use them. It must ensure benchmarks can be interpreted the same way by all assessors using them. There are four rules of evidence. First, the evidence is valid if it relates to the unit competency and its requirements. Second, a sufficient evidence demonstrates competence over time and complies with the LLN requirements or of the performance task. Third, the evidence is said to be current when it demonstrates current skills and knowledge of the learner and complies with the current standard. And last, it must be proven to be the genuine work of the learner for the evidence to be authentic. So we hope you enjoyed this presentation from Inspired Education. There may be activities available in your student account related to this webinar, so make sure you check them out. Activities may include short quizzes, question and answers, and even external readings. Please also make sure to check your student account for the schedule for live Q&As. We hope to see you soon and good luck in your learning journey.